My formal name is Richard Peery, and my profession now is I'm a retired journalist.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peery. And how long, well, you say retired, but I see things that you've written on Facebook. So, but how long then did you serve as a full-time journalist before you retired?
Well, I was a reporter for first the Call and Post weekly newspaper for for several years, and then I became a reporter for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. I worked there for 35 years and covered a wide variety of areas.
And may I ask, please, what year did you join the Plain Dealer?
I started at the Plain Dealer in 1971.
And for 35 years you were there?
Yeah.
Okay. And certainly, we'd also like to know about the years that you spent with the Call and Post, which I believe is the oldest, longest running black weekly, certainly in the city of Cleveland, if not
Yeah.
the state of Ohio. But the
Yeah.
years that you were there, what years were
Well, I started actually I started late in life, let me say that. I started in 1968, and after I was there only there, I'd never reported before, but I was doing all right, and I was there about 3 weeks when I heard there was a rioting going on. So I went to what became known as the Glenville Shootout, which was almost unprecedented. There were urban riots around the country, but here was an actual gun battle between black nationalists and the police and all. And that was kind of my introduction to journalism.
Okay. So, may I ask, Mr. Peery, I know about first responders, but you hear that there's rioting going on and you choose to go where the uprising is taking place, or was that an
But
assignment?
that's the only thing a reporter, I thought, was supposed to do. Maybe I was young and dumb, but I thought that's why I wanted to be a reporter.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that I understood you correctly, that
Yeah,
you
yeah.
willingly went into a situation like that.
Yeah, if you want me to tell you a little more detail of that.
Absolutely.
This was at a time when the Superior Avenue around 105th Street was a very busy area, and there was constant traffic and stores along the streets and everything. I got word of it and went there just as it had just gotten dark. I turned off 105th Street to go down Superior Avenue to Lakeview, is where I heard the area was. It was pitch black. There were no street lights on, no lights in any of the buildings along the street, and the only illumination was from my headlights or from buildings that were burning along the sidewalk with nobody fighting the fires. And so anyway, I got down to Lakeview and Superior and saw a police car burning. And as I say, I was young and dumb still. I got out of my car to take a picture of it. And then I realized I was standing right in the glow. There must be people around doing things because the car, the way it was burning. And I decided I better get back in my own. I took one quick picture and shot out of there, and picture didn't come out. But anyway, it would have been a great shot if it had worked.
But were you able to write about it, however? A story that was actually printed in a
Did
publication?
I write about it?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I wrote for the Call Post, the
Uh-huh.
article covering what happened. That's why I went there, was because I thought I was supposed to do that as a reporter for the Call Post. And the Call Post was a great experience, though. The William O. Walker, who was the publisher for many decades, was really a first-class businessman and all, and knew the business, and his kind of second in command that had been with him since before World War II, Charles Loeb, was an extremely well-skilled writer and all, and they ran everything. Um, Funny thing is, when I went to the plain dealer, I had always, well, I went because the plain dealer paid twice as much money. And I had always assumed that the daily newspapers were the big leagues of journalism, and the weeklies were kind of the minor leagues where you got started, but you really were on the highest level with the dailies. But when I got to the plain dealer, what dawned on me that I didn't see anybody there in any capacity who seemed to have the ability and skills that W.O. Walker and Charles Loeb had. I was really working among the very best and didn't realize it.
Thank you for sharing. This is, I believe the Colin Post has been around for well over 100 years, perhaps even 110 at this point. But yes, a rich history.
The Colin Post, interesting paper. It merged, I think, in the 20s to become the Colin Post. I think, or late 20s probably, and W.O. Walker came there in the early 30s. Before that, there were separate papers, and one had been owned by Garrett Morgan, who was, of course, the great inventor and developed a practical life-saving device that was used by fire departments and many other things. He started the newspaper because he had a hair preparation, and the newspaper was there to, so he could advertise the hair preparation. But then there was also Norman McGee, who had owned one of the papers, had been a part owner. He was a lawyer and became the first black stockbroker in the country. And he had an office in the Colin Post building when I worked there. He was an old man by that point, almost as old as I am now. And he used to come up to the newsroom from his law office because we had a table where all of the black newspapers in the country, or at least a representative sample of them, were displayed. The newspapers would send each other copies around the country, and he liked to come in and glance at them and see what was going on. So one day he and I happened to be standing at the table and saw a headline from a paper, I don't know where it was, Baltimore or Pittsburgh someplace, but it was about a bank robbery, big headline. And he looked at that and he said to me, "That's a good thing." And I thought, what? This very proper, distinguished, older lawyer and stockbroker? What do you mean by that? So I asked him why he said that. And he told me, when I was a young man, a Negro would never think of robbing a bank. Always too scared. Said now, if the young people have got enough nerve to rob a bank, they got enough nerve to do anything else. And that's the good thing about it. So that was one of the things I learned from him. Then, of course, also in the Colin Post building, there were several offices. There was the office of the Cooper Travel Agency. And Mr. Cooper was the first black travel agent licensed in the country. So W.O. Walker had that building that not only had his newspaper, but it had the first black stockbroker, the first black travel agent, all right there on the corner of 105th and Chester.
Thank you so much, always, for the history lesson. Now, Mr. Peery, if I said to you, because I believe this to be the truth, that there are many journalists in this city who consider you to be the dean of black journalists. And I'm thinking of some of the things that I've heard from members of the Greater Cleveland Association of Black Journalists. Yeah. Would you agree with me that I'm probably right, that they say those kinds of things about you?
Well, I still attend the meetings, even though I'm not a working journalist. Well, it gives me something to do. And they honored me in a way. They have a practice, an old African practice of not starting the meeting without the permission of the oldest person in the room. And so they always start every month with me. I give my permission, then I shut my mouth.
Okay. Many of them think the world of you. And I would like to know more about where your passion from journalism got started. I mean, the roots of the passion for the profession of journalism. You say you started late in life.
Yeah.
So what was the catalyst for that?
Okay. Well, I did a lot of fooling around. I was always, growing up, I was always interested in writing, and it came kind of easy to me. And was on my high school newspaper and got the most fundamental understanding of journalism. And then I went to college off and on, both in Minneapolis, where I grew up, and in at Western Reserve University here in Cleveland, but I worked on blue-collar jobs in between, and I worked as a waiter. Well, when I was in high school in the summers, I started working as a railroad waiter and traveled across the northern part of the country while I was still in school. And then I wound up in Cleveland, and I did live in Detroit for a year before I came to Cleveland. And then I worked as a waiter, and I worked as a truck driver, and I worked on other jobs here while taking part-time courses. And finally, I realized I had to get more stabilized, and I started going to the call-in post. I asked for a job, and they said, "We don't have anything," and come back and ask again. I did that week after week. I would just show up there on my day off and say, "You got anything?" And one day I walked in, and he says, "Yeah, there's an opening." And said to me, in effect, "There's your desk and your typewriter, and here's a camera. Now do some stories." Well, I had submitted, of course, some samples of my writing, so they knew I could write English well. But that's how I got started. And the reason there was an opening was because a veteran call and post reporter named Bob Williams, who was really considered the premier black reporter in Cleveland, he had just been hired away by the Cleveland Press Daily newspaper. And all of a sudden, they were ready to try somebody else at the call post. Bob worked with me for 2 weeks before he moved on to the press, introduced me around and gave me the best possible introduction to journalism, made me, or introduced me to the right contacts and that kind of thing. So I just kind of started writing, and then when I found myself in the middle of the Glenville situation, came back and wrote that. I found out later that did kind of cement my position that they saw, at least, that I could turn in a readable story on some major news.
Mr. Peery, may I ask about 1968?
Yeah.
I like to say, because I'm parroting a lot of other historians, that 1968 was a watershed year in American history.
Well, it was a watershed period. The 60s from 1965 on was a watershed era in that as far as black Americans are concerned, there were all of a sudden these urban uprisings around the country. The first big one that was recognized was in, or the biggest one was Watts, or the biggest two, Watts in Los Angeles and Detroit. The first one that was kind of recognized was, I think, 1964 in Harlem. There had periodically been uprisings in Harlem, but the one, the historians say that what really kicked off this wave was the Harlem Uprising. I disagree with the historians, see that all the time, because I think 2 weeks before the Harlem incident, in Cleveland, in the Glenville area, where the public school system, in order to maintain racial discrimination and prevent black kids from having to sit in classrooms with whites, they started overcrowding the black neighborhood with schools and taking away the playgrounds and building schools on them. So you'd have 2 schools on one lot. And there were so many bad things going on like that. Well, the people concerned about civil rights, especially the NAACP and the CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, which had a lot of fiery young people in it, they were demonstrating against constructing a new school on Lakeview Road next to an old school. And in order to demonstrate or to prevent the construction, they started lying down in front of the trucks and all, and getting in the trenches and just lying there so that construction would be halted. That was a tactic that was used around the country for various protests. But here in Cleveland, when they laid down in a ditch in front of a bulldozer, and then a minister, a young white minister named Reverend Bruce Clunder, who's still in his 20s, ordained minister, he laid down in back of the bulldozer. The bulldozer operator saw these people in the trench, and he backed up and ran over Reverend Clunder. The picture was incredible of the bulldozer tracks on this man's back in the mud. And that was a picture of Cleveland that was shown, it was on television all over the country. And so as a result of that, of course, there were crowds out there, many crowds of people who weren't even participating in the, in laying down or anything like that, but were cheering on the demonstrators. They erupted. And there was a lot of bottle throwing and confrontation with the police all through the night. So anyway, what I say, long way of saying, when the historians say it was the Harlem Uprising, no, it was the Cleveland Uprising that launched the whole string.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've seen that photo, but it's interesting, that you reminded us that people all over the country saw that photo.
Yeah.
And for me, it speaks volumes about the power of photojournalism.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody had to stand there knowing that that young man was dead, that husband, that father, that minister, crushed to death by this bulldozer or whatever piece of heavy equipment that was that backed over him. And have the courage, to submit that, knowing that his wife and his children would probably see it too. But I guess I want to ask a question then about journalism.
Yeah.
And reporting, because I often heard, I don't hear it as much anymore, that as far as the Column Post was concerned, if it bleeds, it leads. So there's a lot of bad news, people would say, that's on the front page of the paper because it helps to sell papers. But do we print the images of Bruce Clunder, after he's been crushed to death? Do we print the images of Emmett Till? Is that part of the responsibility of the journalist, as you see it?
I think the responsibility of journalists is to make sure that the public gets the information it needs to understand and make good, well-based decisions on what policy should be, what action should be. So there are many pictures, many scenes that are really borderline. they're going to be shocking, they're going to be traumatic for people to see, and painful, especially for the families. And the journalist has to ask the question, does the need for the public to see this detail outweigh the damage or just bad feelings that it will create on with some people? And that's there's no one way, no one rule to answer that. It has to be a case by case decision. And then of course with newspaper journalism, which I know basically extrapolated to television, but newspapers, when they sold, if they were sold on, at, each edition had to be sold to somebody as opposed to home delivery. They were more inclined to go with the more sensational presentation. And here in Cleveland at the time, back in the 60s and, well, for many, I guess for decades, the Morning Plain Dealer was a home delivery paper. People got it on their doorstep when they got up and they could read it with breakfast and go to work. The Press was an afternoon paper, and so people by that time were up and about and moving around when the paper came out, and so they had more newsstand sales, and they were more sensational. But I think that was a product of the way they were distributed. One had home delivery and didn't need that point of sale sensation, and the other had to have a large part of its sales be spontaneous. So this is one of the things that goes into these decisions, but at the same time, of course, there is an obligation of the news media to tell the truth and make sure that people understand what's going on.
That word truth is interesting. I've seen it on Facebook. For example, I have one Facebook friend out of the almost 5,000 Facebook friends that I have, but where it asked the about section, and it asked about religion, and my friend put truth. And I thought that was interesting that he chose to say that truth is that important. And I don't know if we don't deify human beings, but this person says his religion is truth. And I thought that was profound. and just sitting here today, I'm wondering, for a writer to write that on Facebook, if you, being a journalist or a retired journalist, if there are other writers in your family that in Minneapolis or other places that help you to see the power of journalism and truth, when they are there in the same story.
Well, I would say that what used to be true back when I was growing up and in my early days in Cleveland, it's true all over the country, people, well, you're talking about the black community now, we had two sources of information. We had the white press and we had the black press. And if we saw something in the white press that looks like we wanted to know what actually happened, for instance, a police shoots a black man. And of course, we would have the white press version that the man had a knife or whatever, or the police thought he had a knife. And then we would wait until, say, the Call and Post came out to get what we thought was really the truth. How witnesses said, no, he didn't have a knife or anything else. So anyway, there were two versions of incidents that affected us. One told in the mass media of the white community, and the other told by black journalists. And so it was very important role that journalists played then, to let the community know things that were important for us to know, but we never would have known them if we had to rely on outside press to tell us.
Mr. Perry, you mentioned earlier, again, that you grew up in Minneapolis, but you also attended college at Western Reserve University.
Yeah.
So did you come to Cleveland to attend college, or what brought you to here?
That was okay. That was kind of wondering. As I told you, I left Minneapolis. I lived in Detroit for a year. I had a brother who lived here in Cleveland. He was working. He kept after me to come visit, and he was 11 years older than I am. And he used to say, "When you coming?" And so I had visited him once or twice, but then I came down and I was going to stay a few weeks. And I did, during that time, I somehow ran into a job that was better than what I had, and I took it, and always thinking I'm going to leave Cleveland again. But I guess it was after a while, years later, I looked around. I'm married, I have children, and I have a house. I guess I'm a Clevelander after all. I'm not leaving. So I got here by accident, without intent, and somehow I think I fit in, kind of. Cleveland fit me better than anything I knew going on.
And you chose Western Reserve University. And at that time, I'm guessing perhaps Fenn College might also have been available, an option. But your decision to take coursework at Case Western Reserve,
Yeah.
what influenced that?
Well, I was, as I say, I was working on what would be considered blue collar kinds of jobs, and I knew that at some point I wanted to do something more challenging to me, and that's why I went to reserve, and why I, of course, when I started asking for a job at the Call-in Post, I knew it was time for me to settle down on something I really found challenging. And what I have said to people was, first of all, I started working in a hotel when I was 13 years old. So I worked, all through school, all the time. Started in junior high school. Intermittently, I had different kinds of jobs on up until I was 33. So I tell people I worked for 20 years, and then I decided I didn't like that anymore, and so I quit work and haven't worked since. I became a reporter instead. I never felt I was going to work after that. I was doing what I wanted to do.
And I like that distinction. If
Yeah.
you want to do it,
Yeah.
and you do it all the time with excellence, then it's not work.
Yeah, no, I didn't. It just having had to show up and do what I hated doing or just didn't have any feeling for, and then going and getting paid to do what I really would do anyway, if I could have existed doing it. There was a big difference. It was a real lesson for me. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And Mr. Peery, I'm a little biased, which is not good. If you're a reporter, you probably shouldn't be biased, but I am, because I know the significance of this convention, what it means to the members of the Greater Cleveland Association of Black Journalists, what it means to NABJ, for the National Association of Black Journalists to have been in existence for half a century, and still to believe that they have a message for the world as Black journalists. So that's my bias. I just wanted to state that on the record, so I'm going to try to be fair and balanced here. But I want to ask you about that incident, that reporting on the uprising in the summer of 1968, what people have very often described as the Glenville shootout.
Mm-hmm.
You're there as a reporter, and you have a camera. Was that the norm? You've got to be the photographer and the writer. Would you have been expected to interview people if you had seen folks? Yeah, although it was pitch black, there were lights on the car. Was that part of the job as well, or what's the assignment?
Well, all at the small weekly newspaper, you did everything. You carried a camera and you interviewed people and you took their pictures and you wrote the stories. You had to do the whole thing, if that's what you're asking. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very wordy question, but I'm thinking about Alan Cole
Hmm.
and all of the images that he took that appeared in the Column Post, especially from the 30s, at least through the 60s. There were some images there, and he passed away in 1970. But I haven't seen. Maybe I've seen one byline for maybe he was a member of St. James AME Church,
Hmm.
and I believe it was the second time the church burned.
Hmm.
There were his photos,
Yeah.
and there was a little note. But I'm just trying to put myself in that space, in the call-in post space where people are doing so much and
Well,
maybe getting paid half as
well,
half as much as we
Alan
do.
Cole. Alan Cole was the legendary Cleveland photographer, but he was a photographer. He was there is a difference between journalists, a journalist photography and uh, portraits and other, and artistic photography. Although, it, in journalism, you can be artistic or anything else if your talents allow it. But at the same time, the idea of taking pictures as a journalist is to tell the story. It's part of a story that's being told. Uh, People like Alan Cole, many of them, they were photographers. They had photo studios, which I guess you don't have much of anymore, but they were in every neighborhood. And they took portraits. They took people's pictures. They weren't telling news stories. That wasn't the idea. The idea was to capture an image of something. He might go to a church and take a picture of one of the church clubs, but it's posed and all that. Of course, if they're in the case of the St. James fire, then that all of a sudden he's taking a news picture. But that wasn't his role. He was not assigned to be someone who went out and just covered telling the news. So anyway, there were other freelance reporters that were used, but the kind of role that I was trying to play was as someone who was reporting on events happening uh, and really capturing the story that I was writing, capturing it in pictures. There was that kind of a difference. Yeah. Photojournalist is the phrase I was looking for, as
Yeah,
opposed
there it
to
is.
portrait uh, photographers.
Yes. I wanted to ask Mr. Perry, and following up on something you said earlier, you said you looked around one day and you had a wife, you had children, you had a house. Well, I guess I'm a Clevelander. So can you tell me about some of the other people who were in that house? Are there any other journalists who are in the Peery family, or were you in a class by yourself?
Well, it's a funny thing. No, my children didn't go into journalism. They're doing other things here. I had two daughters. Uh, the But if you're asking about my family entirely, my father wanted to always to be a journalist, but he was a post office clerk, or well, railway mail clerk, rode trains, and trains at that time used to carry a post office car, where they threw the mail and all this. So that's what he did for a living, but he had a printer partner, and they would from time to time put out in a newspaper uh, in Minneapolis. Minneapolis had a very small black community to start with. They weren't the only uh, paper in town, and so it wasn't as big a deal when I was growing up as it might have been had he done it full time. But of course, he wasn't about to quit his stable post office job to starve as someone trying to serve a small community with a paper and no money coming in. He couldn't do it. Plus, he had 7 children, so it had to be a sideline with him.
Yes.
But I think he was happy when I found out I became newspaper reporter. And then I have one of the brother who was here that I came to see, Nelson. He was working as a bricklayer, but he actually was a writer and wound up publishing several books. But he was working as a bricklayer at that time, so there was a kind of a writing thread in my family. That's what I was trying to get at. But I guess I'm the only one who actually became somebody with a job doing that.
Mr. Peery, I'd like to ask you about some of your contemporaries, other history makers in Cleveland, because there was an event that I had the pleasure of coordinating when I was teaching at Cleveland State. We had a guest scholar come in, Dr. Nashani Frazier, who ended up publishing a book about, I think she called it Harambe City, talking about the Congress for Racial Equality's work here in the city of Cleveland, where her parents and her aunt, and the mother was, I believe, a postal worker, but Nashani earned her doctorate at Columbia. I believe she's teaching in North Carolina now, but scholar friend of mine, young scholar, Spelman alumna as well, in case she sees this video, and I want to give her all her props. She's amazing. And her book is quite interesting too. But this event took place at Corey United Methodist Church. The panelists included you, the Reverend Dr. Marvin A. McMickle.
Yeah.
There was somebody in the audience who looked like you. I assumed it was your brother. He was on fire. Because we went there to talk about the significance of the ballot or the bullet, and that the fact that Malcolm X delivered that speech in Cleveland before he gave another version in Detroit. But I wonder, in thinking about that era, again, he's assassinated before his birthday in February of 1965. But that speech, if it still has meaning for you, and if there's a message in there that this generation of journalists might benefit from.
Well, first of all, thank you for mentioning Nashani. We're still Facebook friends. I know. And she's doing great work where I think she's in North Carolina now. I do remember of course, the panel there at Corey, and because Corey was a place the venue where Malcolm gave the ballot or bullet speech. You asked me, what does it resonate with me? I have a funny story about that. I was at the speech. Of all the people I've talked to who were there, no one else has had the same reaction I had. I was kind of disappointed. Malcolm X had broken away from the Nation of Islam, and of course I knew what the Nation of Islam stood for and what their program was. I was desperately anxious to find out what new insights Malcolm had. He had made his pilgrimage, plus he was talking about breaking out of just a color interpretation of the world and realizing that people of all races, all colors can do good or do bad. And I was going there expecting to hear him say what the next step should be. And when the strongest thing he came up was, it's either the ballot or the bullet, I was thinking, well, I knew that already. I mean, what else you got? So I walked out and I thought, it was an entertaining speech, but not that great to me. And I have heard for the was it 50 years, ever long it's been since. I've heard over and over it was the greatest speech and one of the most significant speeches in history. And so I have to say, my reaction, I think, was a little bit different, only because I'd heard it before. And I realized, looking back on it, that most of the people in that auditorium hadn't heard it the same way before. So, but yeah, it doesn't resonate with me. I think the truths that he spoke are still there, and they're more important today than ever before. Or the challenges we face today are unlike anything we faced in the past. Far more serious, far more dangerous, and we need to do far more to wake up, and yet we have far less unity than we had in the past to protect ourselves. So I think that his speech was appropriate for the time, but we need to build on it rather than simply go back to it.
When I think about, we've had a lot of these centenary celebrations. I was in Harlem earlier this year, and they were finishing up the centenary celebration for James Baldwin in Harlem. I was at the Schomburg. It's James Baldwin everywhere. I was happy. That was worth the Greyhound bus trip to get to Harlem for that workshop. But then I think about 1925. There's all these boy babies. Malcolm Little, May 1925, and then Louis Stokes, February 1925, Stanley Tolliver, October 1925, and I want to hear from all of them before this year is over. I sent that message to Sherry Tolliver. I want to hear it because, again, I think there are lessons there. I heard what you said about not going back to Ballot or the Bullet, but moving forward, the next step. If we need more. But your thoughts on these, because I do this a lot, these centenary celebrations, are there lessons that we learn when we go back? I thought, is there something in the water in 1925? What's going on that all these great leaders that I admire, are coming into the world and they come out fighting?
That's an interesting question. I don't think it was the year 1925 that made the difference. That was the experience that was so important. It was after 1945, as they were becoming adults and getting involved in the world and learning how the world works. And it was a dynamic time. America, of course, America accepted segregation, racism, all these things. Before World War II, they were just mainstream. After the war, it was different. I think that the real watershed was how, in order to fight Adolf Hitler, to fight the Nazis, to win World War II, there had to be a reevaluation of so many things, including racism. And so all of a sudden, while there were always black people who fought these things as individuals or in small groups, finally the nation had to start confronting these issues. I mean, if Hitler is wrong for his master race theory, then how can we practice the same thing? So I think that's the kind of seed that was planted. And the people you name, most of them, were veterans of World War II. They went in the Army as teenagers, and they really came to their majority dealing with the most significant confrontation in world history. And when they came back, got out of the Army, I think there were so many who felt we're not going back to what it was when we went in. So I think America was somewhat ready for change. It was a long process, but the direction had changed, and the people, the veterans, Medgar Evers is, let's see, I don't remember, was he born in 25? He was that generation. Maybe he was a little bit older.
I'm not sure of his birth year, but I know he was a veteran.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But the point is, I think that was the real watershed. They all came out at the same time, came out of the military with the same determination to do something different from what they had known growing up as, going through school. And so I guess I'm just speculating, but I think that really maybe explains why so many people born in 1925 did significant things in the 1960s.
Yeah, I'm sort of ignoring the list of questions. Thank you for indulging me and answering these questions that come to mind,
Yeah.
because I think your answers are certainly profound. I hope my questions are good. But may I share on a more personal note, and also professional too, is have this job at doing something that I love to do at the Western Reserve Historical Society, and I made up a fancy title for myself, Distinguished Scholar of African American History and Culture. And I know an important archival collection when I see one. I saw the collection of the late, great Dr. A. Grace Lee Mims in a storage locker in Bedford, from the floor to the ceiling, stuff. And she had a niece who loved her dearly from the metro New York area, and she came down several times. This is all during COVID. And with her friends, and we went through every one of those boxes.
Oh my God.
And about 110 of those ended up at the Western Reserve Historical Society. And lots of photographs taken by her amazing husband, the late, great Dr. Howard Alexander Mims.
Yeah.
And some of your pictures are in there, in that collection. It's a wonderful gathering. I said,
Well,
I
thank you.
wish I had been invited to that party, because you were there sitting next to a beautiful woman, who I think was your wife, because I've seen some other pictures too. But also Malcolm and Ernestine Brown were there. Howard and A. Grace Lee Mims were there. It was quite a gathering. But for that generation, it just seemed like there were, that's my parents' generation. I'm not telling your age. I don't think I'm telling mine. But they were just doing great things. I hear stories about Grace coming from, well, she did her undergraduate, A. Grace Lee Mims, at Hampton. Well, she and Dr. Howard Mims, and they come to Cleveland. But Grace comes here on the back of a segregated bus and goes to library school at Case. And it's so elegant, so graceful. I can't imagine somebody saying, okay, you niggers in the back or in the front, go to the back. But she did it. And, and lived to tell that story, and to say also that things had changed. And it wasn't the same journey anymore coming from Alabama to Cleveland. But when I think about that generation, I just think they were just my parents.
Yeah.
All amazing. But am I overstating this, or were they in fact just that amazing? No, the folks I just named, because you knew them. Howard
I didn't
Grace
quite get what is your.
Yeah, it just am I reading too much into their life stories when I say they did amazing things against the odds, because they knew Jim Crow very well, the Southern form.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the Minneapolis form. I don't know, maybe there's something a little different going on there. But the Alabama form, the Virginia form of Jim Crow, segregation in America, and nevertheless were able to do great things.
Well, are you asking, did the people you're thinking of, did they do more because they came from the South? Is that what you're?
Well, I'm sort of looking up to them, again, because it's my parents' generation. I'm the daughter of, farmers from Arkansas, who left Arkansas running in the 1950s, met and married here in Cleveland, and never thought about going back home, except for vacations. And so I, again, if I take off these glasses of mine that allow me to look up to and admire these people, am I going to see them struggling? I saw them just doing amazing things, almost heroic things, when I look at their life stories. But was it a constant struggle, or had they overcome some of these things that have been placed in their path as barriers?
Incidentally, let's see, but my brother Nelson, who I mentioned, he used to say that this debate over when the civil rights movement started. Was it Rosa Parks sitting on the bus? Or was it Emmett Till, who months earlier, who was murdered? Or what was it? Well, of course, all these things were important in galvanizing the country. But Nelson used to say that the civil rights movement started with the end of World War II, because that generation was what really started the confrontation in an organized way. And the people who left the South, whether they were civil rights activists or not, they were strong people. I mean, people don't just get up and go. You know, the least talented people or the least motivated people aren't the ones who get up and go. It's the ones who have the greatest strength, I think, who are disproportionately are the ones who move on. I would assume that's anywhere, whether the European immigrants or the black immigrants from the South or whatever. So I think that the people you're talking about were really strong, good people who could get a lot of things done, if that's what you're talking about. Yeah.
Thank you. I was editorializing, but yeah, I just wanted to say that. I just thought they were amazing. And if somebody goes back and they pick at their bones and try to dig up something, they may find some imperfections there. But it just seems to me that they were able, despite the odds being against them, to accomplish some great things. But again, it's your story. I wanted to know what you thought about that.
Well, did I answer your
Oh,
question?
you absolutely did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What I want to emphasize, of course, that history is so important, and we cannot survive as a people if we don't know history. And an example of that I look at now is the fascist takeover of government that's taking place right now in Washington. I think so few people recognized it. It's just now, this year, and the summer by the summer of 2025, that people are realizing, getting in the mainstream, talking about, we elected a fascist who was changing the country. Had people had more understanding of history, the surprise that we see today, they wouldn't be expressing that, because we would have known what was coming and would have headed it off. I was given an award. I was glad to get it. I'm honored by it and humbled by it, by the National Association of Black Journalists. I call it the Old Folks Award. The title they use is Legacy Award, because I was hanging around so long. But that was in 2022. And as I addressed the group at the award ceremony, I mentioned how there is this talk of fascism. And I was listing things that we have to be concerned about, the journalists going forward. Global warming and possibility of nuclear war and fascism, and these are things we have to look at. But I realized that in 2022, there weren't many people using that word, fascism, because I think we did not know and understand history. And so we allowed someone who showed all of the characteristics to become the most powerful man in the world. And I recognize it, I think, in part, because I read Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, that he wrote in 1925. And I could see from 2016 on, everything that Donald Trump was doing was following the blueprint that Adolf Hitler had laid out almost 100 years earlier. But without a knowledge of history, unfortunately, we're at this place where we now have to come to terms with it and confront it after it's well rooted and established. So that's the importance of learning history. And we as black people cannot have a future if we don't have a past. I think that's very important.
Well, Mr. Peery, and we're probably getting close to the end of our time together because the library closes at a certain time. And a half hour before it closes, it makes this announcement that the library is going to close pretty soon.
Oh.
So I'm going to have to thank you for your time in a minute. But you know, there's another aspect of African American history, Black history, that gets a lot of attention in the textbook, and that's the Great Migration. And usually it's a movement. You know, this is the largest internal movement in America for a group, a single demographic group. So black people, like millions of them, eventually leave the South and end up in cities, mostly in the North and in the far West. And but your story is different. Of how your family came to be in this part of the world. Same with Dr. Howard A. Mims. I think Dr. Mims was in one of those race colonies, but he was in an all-black, had a historically all-black town. And then eventually, he makes his way to Hampton Institute University now. And then the rest is history for Howard and Grace Mims. But we all ended up here in Cleveland, or our families ended up in the North. Is there a migration story of how your family ended up in Minneapolis, and then eventually your brothers in Cleveland, and then here you are?
My family, my parents were married in St. Joe, Missouri. I never met my mother's father, but I did meet my father's father. But both of them were born in slavery. So I'm the grandson of slaves on both sides of my parentage. So I guess I'm as old as I look. Huh? But in any case, my father, after World War I, he served in France, and my mother had grown up in Kansas. Well, she'd grown up across Missouri. I don't know all the details of it, but she had lived in several places in Missouri and Kansas growing up, and graduated from high school in Kansas City, Kansas. And one of the highlights of her high school that she mentioned was heavyweight champion Jack Johnson came and addressed the school. And she said how everybody was so excited and it was really hectic. But when he gave his talk, all the girls, of course, were falling over themselves, walking on air after his speech. She said she was not impressed. She told them because he did not speak proper English. So anyway, they got married in St. Joe, Missouri, and my father took a job with the post office as railway mail clerk. And they didn't want to live in the Jim Crow South, I guess. So he put in for transfer, and that's how we got to Minnesota. Well, how they got to Minnesota, then, of course, I was born there. But as far as Cleveland is concerned, of course, Cleveland attracted everybody because Cleveland, up until the 1970s, was one of the world's greatest industrial powerhouses. There was money here, there were jobs, there were things to do here. And then, of course, by the 70s, the air started going out of the balloon, the factories closed, and now we have a very different Cleveland from what it was back then. Now, of course, so many people are going south instead of coming north like the previous generations. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing your migrations, or your parents' migration story.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that other people were going north in search of a job, and he had the job already,
Yeah.
and just wanted a transfer. That's an interesting take.
Yeah, those railway mail clerk jobs, there were a number of black people who had those jobs. And the history, as I understand it, of how they got into it was back in the old days, the late 19th century, all the railroad cars were made of wood. The post office car was behind the engine, which was the most dangerous spot on the train if there was an accident and the car broke apart and people were killed and injured who were working. And so you had these literate black people who could read and write, had some education, couldn't get jobs at their skill levels, but the post office took them in, and it was a bonanza for the post office. And they had these jobs in the mail car that white people who had choices wouldn't take because of the danger. And then when the railroad cars transferred from wood to metal, steel, they became much safer. And the post office started getting rid of black employees, or tried to, and were replacing them with whites. And that's when the National Postal Alliance was formed. That's a union, a black union of post office workers, but it was formed to preserve the jobs of the black postal workers on the railway cars. And of course, the union, I guess, is still in existence. It became the first industrial style union that the federal government recognized. And it still meets, I think, is still in existence today, although everything is integrated now. Yeah.
Well, Mr. Peery, again, I want to thank you for your time. And I always have one of those questions, something else that you would like to say. But let me ask, or just state something, and then you'll understand why I'm asking this. Are you familiar with the musical Ragtime?
The music.
The musical Ragtime.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a song, Make Them Hear You. Go out and tell the story, let it echo far and wide, make them hear you. Mm-hmm. How justice was demanded and justice was denied, make them hear you. And say to those, I might be mixing up the verses, say to those who blame us for the way we chose to fight that sometimes there are battles that are more than black or white. And I did not put down my sword when justice was my right. But it goes on. But to say that your sword can be a sermon or the power of a pen, of the power of the pen, and teach every child to raise his voice. And then, my brother, will justice be demanded by 10 million righteous men? Make them hear you. Close quote, or close paraphrase. I wanted to ask, because you don't just open the meetings for Greater Cleveland Association of Black Journalists. You give us permission to start, and then you also have these parking lot sessions after the formal meeting is over. What is it that you say to people that make them want to hear you? After we've been talking for over an hour, how is it that you make people want to hear you?
I'm the last person that would understand that. I don't know, but people ask me, if they ask me a question or if we get on a subject, I guess I have a bad habit of talking until I see their eyes glazing over, and then I catch myself. But I think part of it, maybe, though, if I understand your question, I think maybe part of why I am specifically who I am is maybe my growing up in Minnesota at a time when there were very few black people. Relatively, there were fewer than 10,000 black residents in Minneapolis when I was going to school. And had an awful lot of interaction with everybody. And at the same time, we of course knew we were black and knew some things about black history, and we knew that the things that we were being taught were not the truth. Being taught about the country, about the nation, about what America was and stood for, and that we were excluded. And I think maybe the rubbing shoulders with so many people of so many diverse backgrounds maybe gives me a little different perspective on what we see than a lot of people get who just haven't been open to the experiences of other people who aren't like them, but rather have sealed themselves off from understanding people in other communities. So if that helps me to see some things that maybe some other people doesn't see, that might be part of what you're asking me. I don't know.
Well, in conclusion, is I always have to ask, is there something else you would like to say? But is there anything that you would like to say about the power of the pen? Does it still exist?
Well, the power of the pen, and of course that's now figurative, not literal anymore. It's the power now is on the internet and it's electronic power. But the communication is so important. Nobody has understanding unless they read and listen and watch what's going on. And of course, people get their information, well, they used to get their information from established journals, newspapers, and so on. Now, of course, it comes over the internet. There's no filter. You don't know what's true and what isn't unless you check it out. And the old power of the pen isn't as powerful as it used to be as a result. And I think that in part is a reason why the nation has been willing to be duped by people who lie and don't have the best interests of anybody at heart but themselves and the money they make. And so we have to find new ways. I think you're asking me a question, what do I think is the power, and what I guess my basic response is we have to go and find the new power, because people of my age, my generation, we don't have the answers to tomorrow's problems and needs, because the technology has changed so much. All we know is what happened, what worked, what didn't work, but it's going to be up to the young people to find the answers to the future.